Okie dokie. We are ready to continue our series entitled How We Got Here. This is the ninth session. Next week will be the final session. Okay? We have talked about so many things. And tonight we're going to probably enter into things that will be more familiar if you have a family background among churches of Christ. For me, learning all this was fresh when I started diving into this several years ago, because I'm a first generation believer. And I don't have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who were Church of Christ members back in the Depression and before and during the war and during the racial tensions of the 1960s and all those things that helped shape us, that we'll be talking about even more so next week. And it's always fascinated me how we got here. Because it's, as I said earlier, almost every book in the Old Testament challenges the present generation to make sure that those coming behind them know how they got there. They wanted everybody to know the story. They wanted parents to tell their children and make sure their grandchildren knew, and on and on and on, whether it's Abraham or whether it's Noah or whether it's Samson or whether it's Egypt, Pharaoh, the Red Sea, Mount Sinai. All those things built who they were and gave their culture a foundation. Among us, and tonight fits into this, we became determined to be people of the book. And so if it wasn't a gospel sermon, we weren't really, a lot of folks weren't interested in it. Or if it wasn't, even as we're going to talk about tonight, a controversy, people really weren't interested in it. And so where we've gotten so far into this is that we found out how Churches of Christ became established, what motivated people like Stone, Campbell, Raccoon, John Smith, all these other guys in their world that they dealt with, because they all came out of some Christian tradition. And what bothered them were things like Calvinism, were things like church government, where you had an ecclesiastical deal where you had people that counted and people that didn't count. You had big bosses, little bosses. You had clergymen and who had all the perks and all the privileges and all the access. And then you had laymen who were just expected to sit there and do what they were told. And when you're in America in the 1760s and 1770s, you're not much in a mood to be told what to do. Independence is in the air, and revolution is right around the corner. And it wasn't just America. It happened later in France and in other places, but between basically 1750 and 1830, almost all the royal houses of Europe were dismantled, and the Catholic Church was hanging on in many, many places. People were becoming more educated. They had the Bible in their own language for the first time. 2 and 2 was not adding up to 7, and they were concerned about it. And so, these things had their own energy and the reasons behind them. The controversy over communion, who would be allowed and who would be out, and the idea that we have the Word from God, but yet we have to have rules written by men, just didn't seem to equate. Which also is a rejection of the Catholic model. And by that I mean, people often ask, well, how can, for example, the Catholic Church believe that in the perpetual virginity of Mary as a saint when Jesus had brothers and sisters? How do you equate that? Or how do you get to where priests cannot have wives when the first Pope, Peter, had a wife? And the reason is that in those systems, And this is so foreign to us because we've been anchored in this for so long now. You know, for us, if it's not in the Bible, we're not interested in it. But in high church, and especially prevalent in Roman Catholicism, and also in Greek Orthodox and other such ecclesiastical traditions, you had a three-legged stool, is the way it was always taught to me. You had the Bible as authoritative, and then you had the teachings of the church, creeds, which were equally authoritative, and you had the Holy See. So if the Pope said it, it was true. And what the Pope said, or the College of Cardinals, or what your bishop or your priest said, carried as much weight as what Matthew 28 says. And if the tradition of the teachings of the church on a certain thing was a certain way, it was just as authoritative as the Bible. Now we reject that, but we weren't the only ones. Lots of people did. And so this idea of restoration was in the air everywhere. And so Cane Ridge and other things that happened helped establish these churches, and they began to swell and take off and began to spread. And they started planting churches when at first they didn't want to. Just like the Methodist movement, they wanted people to stay where they are and bring the whole family of God together in different traditions, accepting one another. And then, but then things like baptism and other things became, separators. And so they separated, planted their own churches, took their own names. Some called themselves Church of Christ, some called themselves Church of God, some called themselves Christian Church. And there really wasn't much distinction between that in those names because nobody was thinking about the way we think about things today. And when Stone and Campbell joined forces, that gave a lot of momentum at the very same instant that westward expansion was opening up across the continent. And so we're going to talk about that tonight as we get into this as well. And all these things were very, very, very important. And so we spent a lot of time talking about the effects of the Civil War on our culture, on our traditions, and most everybody in here is a Southerner. There may be some people in here like me who were not born in the South, but I moved to the South when I was 13, and I never wanted to go back up north again. And I say yes, ma'am, and I say yes, sir, and I say open the door for a lady, and all those other things that all came out of making this unique and monumentous effort to hold on to the values of the region even after so much was lost during the Civil War. And we're going to talk, we'll get into that a little bit more and how it affected our views as Southerners on race relations and things. We'll talk about that next week as well. A lot of people say you shouldn't talk about that. It's the history. It just is what it is. And we'll touch on a little bit tonight if we get there and go from there. And the world changed after that. The economy of America was different in the North than it was in the South. All the money was up north. That's why they call it Wall Street. It's still that way, and but it's not as much so. I remember as a teenager, my brother got all excited. He was in construction, and there was this boom that was starting to happen in North Carolina. Back in the mid-'70s into the '80s that started this whole Piedmont movement and the explosion in the South in terms of banking, insurance, and all those things, if you remember, really began up in North Carolina and then spread across Georgia and into Alabama in the 1960s. Atlanta and Birmingham were about the same size city. And look at the difference now, just because of the transition that was made. I ended up in the South because that's where the work was. My dad came out of the Rust Belt, and he wanted to build a better life for his family. And so things transition over time, but they weren't always the way they are now. Now the South is just as economically strong, if not stronger, than the North. And it's becoming more and more desirable for businesses and banking and insurance and all kinds of things, technology, all of it, data centers, you name it. But it wasn't that way after the war. And so those divides led to what we know of today as Churches of Christ and independent Christian churches. And it became law, essentially, in 1906 when the census director wrote a letter to David Lipscomb asking him if Churches of Christ and Christian churches were two distinct different religious movements, and he said, yes, we are. And it was 3 years before the Christian churches even knew what had happened on that. And we talked about all that. And then last week we talked about how our unity turned into division because of one guy. We'll get back to him in just a minute and how that things go. But it leads us into what we were talking about tonight, because everything that we are about as a religious movement was founded and buried in a foundation that wanted to create unity among believers. That's what we wanted. And there's lots of ways to go about it, but because of some of the influence we talked about last night, we ended up basically being in a position to where we said, we can have unity as long as you agree with me. I don't have to agree with you. You just have to agree with me. And if you agree with me, then we'll have unity. And so everything starts going nuts. And we'll touch on that. But this is Ephesians 2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing one another in love. There's the foundation for unity right there. Not being haughty, not think you're smarter than somebody, not trying to step on people, not trying to find a leverage point, not being political, not being power hungry, not thinking more of yourself than you should. And that didn't happen in a lot of instances right after the war. Everybody was mad at everybody. And it contributed to all these things. But he says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit to the bond of peace, one body, one Spirit, just as God has called one hope when we were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So, and also we talked about Philippians 2, we will continue to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourself. What a good advice. Now, the situation we're in tonight is that Daniel did not speak too long. I did announcements too long, so we're going to have to rush. How close were you? Because he was like, hey, no words. He was playing around. He's like, well, we had a meeting last night, and Adam said, I just need 5 minutes, and I opened the timer up on my phone, and he took 11. So anyway, and I told him, so don't feel bad, okay? But anyway, all right. So we're looking now. Last week we talked about how people started wanting to divide rather than unify, finding reasons to pull away, write people up, disfellowship folks. So there was this great effort to create a unified message. We need to make sure everybody's on the same page. And this is how we got to where we are today in our convictions. And it's a wonderful, beautiful story, and we're going to try to tell it in a very, very, very condensed fashion tonight. We did that last week. There's Daniel Summer. He was the guy that started saying that, the godly thing to do is to step on people and to hurt them and to embarrass them in public and to ruin their reputation and those kinds of things. And I don't know where you've been in church all your life, but I've been in places where there are lots of people who follow that model and have made it their business to try to destroy, appointed themselves as watchdog over everything and end up just ruining people. We even had a publication, I'm not going to mention it, who would celebrate splits in church. Because they got rid of the unfaithful. And if you're ever in a situation where you're at odds with somebody and your solution is they just need to go away, you need to repent immediately. Because that's a direct violation of what the Bible says about unity among brotherhood. And that's my sermon for tonight. But anyway, so we talked about these guys, but they're passing away. David Lipscomb died. J.W. McGarvey's gone. Now it leaves N.B. Hardeman. Now, N.B. Hardeman is always mentioned with A.G. Freed because of Freed Hardeman. Do we have any Freed students here tonight? Anybody went to Freed Hardeman here? Just you. Okay, well, good. You'll love this. I went there, and I enjoyed this too. N.B. Hardeman was born in Millersville, Tennessee, about 15, 20 miles east of Henderson in Chester County, West Tennessee. His father was a doctor. His mother died when he was 18 months old. Within a year, his father had remarried. So the only mother he ever knew was his stepmother, and she was a wonderful woman and a wonderful mother. He wanted to be a doctor like his dad, but he's in West Tennessee. There's not a lot of educational opportunities. So he ended up deciding he would go into education. And that's what he did. Let me get my note here and make sure. He was born in where's he at? I didn't put it on here? Okay. I'm sorry. He was born on May 18, 1874, and he died in 1965. Okay? Has anybody in here ever met N.B. Hardeman? Okay. You. Wow. I never did. That's cool. But anyway, in 1890, he started going to a little school in Henderson, Tennessee. And it wasn't Freed Hardeman, but it will be. And this is where things get pretty interesting. Because the way that we decided in this era to create a unified message were three avenues. One was publications, right? Any of those look familiar to anybody? Gospel Advocate, Christian Courier. There was the Christian Courier, and there was also the Christian Courier that the non-institutional One Cupper started. Truth Magazine, Christian Chronicle, Apologetics Press, the Gospel Guardian, Spiritual Sword, the Advocate of the Old Paths, and then in the 90s, wineskins came along from the progressive side of our churches, and there'd be countless others, thousands of them. The first time I ever got written up was by some angry Alabama preacher who did a little paper that had a circulation of about 12. But he made sure to mail me one, and he wanted to fight. And the guy was so smart, he didn't even realize I was living in the Caribbean at the time as a missionary. And if he wanted to have an argument, he had to come down and see me. And so when he found that out, he stopped picking on me. I guess he thought I was an idiot and he could take me on. But anyway, on that. But you had, like the Chronicle just prints news, right? It doesn't take sides. The Gospel Advocate was screened by editors, and you had to fit the format. The guardrails were here and established by the editors, starting with Lipscomb and going all the way to its very end when COVID hit. And if they didn't like your article, they just didn't publish it. They didn't write you up. They didn't try to condemn you. They just didn't think it was appropriate and wouldn't publish it. If they liked it, they would publish it. And the same could be said about a lot of these. The Spiritual Sword came out of a very conservative, traditional movement in Memphis that created Memphis School of Preaching and some other things that are over there. And they took it upon themselves to be very, very harsh and attackful. I've got a whole stack of them in my library if you ever want to read any. Some were and some weren't. And it was just the way that they did business. And I always read it with interest and thought. And there were some others. The ones that were the worst I didn't even put up here. And I'll go out from there. But there were thousands of it. And we've all seen them, right? Everybody's seen one of these, right? I mean, it's who we became. This is how we were trying to develop a unified message. Everybody was getting on the same page. Because you had these people over here saying you couldn't fellowship with these people, and you had people over here saying that you can't have anything to do with these folks, and this is the way you got to do worship, and this is the way you got to do communion, and this is the way you have to do your singing, and these songs shouldn't be in your song books, and all these stuff. And it gets back to something that came up on our fourth Sunday singing when Kevin asked if anybody remembered the old purple book, Christian Hymns 3. I go back a little bit farther. Anybody remember Sacred Selections, or is that just me? That was always my favorite songbook, Sacred Selections. I love that book. And then the Green Book came out in the 70s, right? Now, ring the message out. Church of Christ National Anthem, and the things that were in that became part of that came out of Louisiana. But anyway, this idea of singularity of message became big. Now, and so the publications played a part in that. But this guy probably played the bigger part of it than anybody. And nobody really knows much about him in our churches anymore, except that there's a school that's got his name along with A.G. Freed on it. Him and A.G. Freed were good partners. I'm not even going to talk about A.G. Freed. And I'm not here saying that Freed Hardeman is the school that set everything right. But this exemplifies exactly what was happening and how it all came together. N.B. Hardeman, we said, talked about when he was born. His mother died, went to school. And where he went to school, he preached his first sermon, not this building, but on this location in Enville, Tennessee. Does anybody even know where Enville is? Enville is about 10 miles out of Henderson, headed east. But this was the first place. And there's still a church that is meeting there at that location. And he was a teenager when he began preaching. And he impressed everybody. Everybody said, this guy's got it. So he graduated from high school, valedictorian, very, very, very smart. And the closest school was a little school over in Chester County, Henderson, Tennessee, where Freed Hardeman is now. And it was first called the Henderson Male Institute. And it was established in 1869. Now, Sandra is not old enough, and I'm not old enough, but we all had friends who were older than us who would tell us about the days at Freed Hardeman when you went into Old Assembly Hall and the boys would sit on one side and the girls would sit on the other side, and they weren't allowed to touch each other. When I was there, they had people walking around, security guys that would give you a ticket for PDA. Anybody else remember PDA besides me? Public display of affection. If you're holding a hand or you're hugging a girl, they're going to write you up and off to the dean's office you go. All these other kinds of things. And all that comes from somewhere. And it's part of being a proper Southern person. When I was at Freed Hardeman in 1978, I lived on second floor Benson. Third floor Benson was the smoking floor. That's where the students who smoked, the boys, would stay. And I always wondered why they had a smoking floor. Well, it's because a lot of tobacco money was coming into Freed Hardeman back in those days. That's really what it gets down to, more than anything else. But this is our Southern roots. And one thing affects the other. I was a PKA guy. We were by far the best social club there, but that's just the side. But anyway, but it started out as just a deal. And then just 8 years later, they decided they needed to change it, needed more students because it was barely hanging on. And for some reason, they named it the Henderson Masonic Male and Female Institute. Now, there are no pictures, but this is like one of the last things that are there. There are grave markers that are around the property of today's Freed Hardeman where people associated with the school were married, and they were all highly involved in the Masonic Lodge. And people say, well, that's odd. Let me tell you something. If you lived in the South after World War II, you could be a Mason or you could be a Klansman, and that was about it. I mean, really, just to be honest about it. And when I was a young preacher, I had a guy come and preach a sermon one time. I wasn't a preacher yet, I was a teenager, condemning Masonic lodges. And I didn't know where it came from. But Masonic lodge used to have a lot of influence on churches in the South, especially in the South. But anyway, I just find that to be interesting. Then in 1885, it became West Tennessee Christian College. And after that, for a few years, N.B. Hardeman arrives at the time that the name is being changed from that to Georgie Robertson Christian College, because Georgie Robertson and that family built Old Main. And if you went to Freed Hardeman, you know Old Main. Up until the early 70s, Old Main is where chapel was upstairs, and it is the centerpiece of the campus at Freed Hardeman University. Old Main. Now it's more of a show place than anything else, but they still have the chairs where the chapel was being held there, and choral groups would practice up there, and social clubs would meet up there, and all kinds of other things. But that's the way it was. But then in 1907, the name was changed to the National Teachers Normal and Business College. I don't know who came up with that name, but they should have been fired immediately. But what had happened is the school lost almost all of its support over the instrumental music issue. And that school closed down. Now, by this time, N.B. Hardeman had graduated from Georgie Robinson and gone on and got his master's and would eventually become the superintendent of school in Chester County, where Freed Hardeman is located. So he was an educator, but he also preached a little bit, and he was kind of a part-time staffer at the downtown church in Henderson there, right across from the campus of Freed Hardeman. But he never was a full-time preacher at any church in his whole entire life. Never was. Such a gifted speaker. But one of the reasons he went into school teaching because they gave him all summers to do gospel meetings and debates. And his debates, he liked to debate Baptist over Baptist doctrine. He liked to debate people over instrumental music. He liked to debate people over Calvinism. He liked to debate, and he was spectacular. And he was one of the moving forces that really created the culture of Churches of Christ wanting to debate other religious groups. Because we're building the message here. We've got people all over the place. We've got to get the flock in. People have to know. People have to know. Well, he became so popular that they began preaching a good bit in Memphis at the Union Avenue Church. The Union Avenue Church still exists today. It's an African-American deal. But the Union Avenue Church of Christ became the first Church of Christ in the United States to have more than 1,000 members, and they can thank M.B. Hardeman for that. He was highly effective. He went to Los Angeles and preached meetings. He went to New York. He went to Canada. He went all over, anywhere, anybody, and everybody was just struck in awe. And he became the spokesman, the best preacher among us. And nobody argued that. So in 1917, 18, business leaders from Henderson came to him and asked him if there's any way he could help establish a school. They wanted to have a college in that little town of Henderson. And him and A.G. Freed agreed to start a college there. And the college in 1919 opened up under the name of Freed-Hardeman College. Became a university in 1990. I remember, no, that's not true. 1980. In 1980, it became a 4-year school. It was a 2-year school from 1919 all the way to 1980. And became a full-fledged. And today, it's not Freed-Hardeman College, it's Freed-Hardeman University. And, but it's just, this is just indicative of what's happening in other places, and we're going to get there. But also what happened in this, so there's Nashville, the red star, the blue dot, that's Chester County in West Tennessee. You can see it's a weird-looking county, and all this is taking place. But at the same time, Nashville is becoming the center of Church of Christ theology. This is where the Gospel Advocate's coming out of. Now, this is where other publications are coming out of. This is where what started out as Nashville Bible School is now Lipscomb College, and this is where a lot of preachers are being trained, and this is where a lot of the money was. And so how are you going to be able to do this? Well, the way M.B. Hardeman did it, he did it the same way Freed-Hardeman does it today. They send all their student recruiters and their fundraisers to Nashville. Okay? And they know this is where the money is, and this is where the people are. And it's always been that way, because Chester County is either Memphis or it's Nashville, because there's nothing there. When I was a student there was, you know, you can walk everywhere. If you've been there, if you took away the university, you would have something half the size of Millersville. It's just the way that it is, and it's a miracle that it exists there. But beginning in 1925, M.B. Hardeman started doing a series in the summer called the Tabernacle Sermons at the Ryman Auditorium in downtown Nashville. And every night, they had more people than they could sit in those deals. This is how popular he had become.
The Nashville Banner showed the next day it would give synopsis of the sermon the night
Right.
before.
Well, we're going to get to that too in this. But not only synopsis, but transcripts. And that becomes part. I have the Tabernacle Sermons in my office. I don't know if they're in the church library or not. But somebody transcribed every word and put it in the print. And that's important to remember as we get into this. Oh, we're out of time already. I got to hurry. Each session had between 18 or 21 sermons, so it would go on for a couple weeks. And the next day, either a synopsis or a full transcript would appear, often on the front page of both the Nashville Banner and the Tennessean. Now, when you take that many words and you put it in that public print, this became the definer of what we believe in Churches of Christ. N.B. Hardeman said it. It's right there in black and white in the paper. So this is the way, this is who we are. This is what we believe. This is our message. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's how everything got so standardized. And it's where we started emphasizing this thing that we call the brotherhood. And the brotherhood among churches of Christ, from about this time up through the 70s and 80s, meant that we were all bound together as one people. And ministries began to blow up everywhere based on that. I mean, when we see Church of Christ Disaster Relief, we say, hey, that's us, right? That's us, man. And it all and this is a new thing. Instead of trying to be a unity movement among the world, we became our own distinct thing, and we put it in print, and we started publishing it, and we put it in books. Everybody who's here has probably seen the book, Why I'm a Member of the Church of Christ. Anybody else seen that book besides me? I went to a church, if you got baptized, they gave you one. They didn't give you a Bible, but they gave you that. I mean, that's it happened to me when I was baptized. They gave me a Bible too, so I'll do with that. But anyway, this is how big it was. And by this time, by the way, I've covered over a lot of stuff because we're already at the end of our time. But N.B. Hardeman's best friend was the governor of the state of Tennessee. He had a lot of influence. And the only reason that Freed Hardeman survived is because he convinced the governor to put a paved road there that would connect it to a major highway somewhere. And that road today will lead you right up to I-40. Of course, there was no I-40 then, but there was still a major thoroughfare that goes into that. Now, the red square you see is the western expansion of Churches of Christ. The blue stars you see are almost all of our colleges and universities. There may be some that I missed. But you have Lipscomb, you have you have Freed Hardeman in Tennessee. You get right across the border up by Jonesboro, you have Crowley's Ridge, which is a 2-year school that's still in existence. You have Harding. You go down to Montgomery, you have Faulkner, which used to be Alabama Christian. You go to Oklahoma, you have Oklahoma Christian. You go down to Abilene, you got Abilene Christian. You go out to the West Coast, you have Pepperdine University. You go up to Nebraska, and you have York, and that's another miraculous story that it could survive up there, but it's doing just fine. You go to Michigan, you have Rochester, which used to be Michigan Christian, but now is called Rochester College. And we'll get to some others that don't exist anymore in a minute. And then that's followed by all these schools of preaching that came up everywhere, all over the place. And like in Florida, actually you have a couple in Florida, but there's one in Atlanta. There's East Tennessee School of Preaching. So we're still doing this, is the whole point. Over in the mountains, you have what used to be IBC Heritage University in Florence. You have Memphis School of Preaching in Memphis. You had Magnolia Bible College down in Mississippi. You had Whites Ferry Road School of Preaching in Louisiana. You had Preston Road School of Preaching in Dallas. You had the Austin Biblical Institute. I'm sorry, that's Sunset, the one over there. You also had Austin. I forgot about that till just now. And then you had the one, I can't remember the name of it, in Colorado. Does anybody remember the name of that school of preaching that came up? And you had the school pop up in West Virginia. And there's a West Virginia School of Preaching now. And you go at it from there. Then you add to that schools that independent Christian churches began to build. You have Kentucky Christian up in Lexington. You come down to Tennessee, and you have Johnson College. You go over to Virginia. You have Bethany. That's the college that Alexander Campbell started. And then you go out to Texas, and the most successful independent Christian school of all is today known as TCU, Texas Christian University. That was a Church of Christ school until the instrumental music thing, and they left. And so those folks that left went to Abilene and started Abilene Christian University. So we decided the way to get the message out is to have this school, and you can see the concentration that's in that box. Now you can also see in recent years, a lot of those schools don't exist anymore. And a lot of them I didn't even put up there, but you start up in Washington, that was Cascade Christian College. It's no longer in existence anymore. You go to the School of Preaching in Colorado, it's gone. You go to down in Texas, the Austin deal is gone. Preston Road is gone. Whites Ferry Road is gone. Magnolia Bible College is gone. You go all the way to Pennsylvania. Northeast Christian College is gone. I can't remember the name of the university in West Virginia. Mike Ross, who's the preacher at Madison, was the last president of that school, and it closed down. But education has always been huge for us and continues to be so, and this is how you get the message out. And this is what has entered us into what I'm calling the age of ministry, where now you're going to see the proliferation of all these kinds of ministries, and it's also the age in which becoming a local preacher is a career path rather than a calling. Because we have all these schools that are trying to recruit all these students and trying to get people involved. And this marks a major transition in our movement and going at it from there. There was so much more that I want to talk about tonight, but I couldn't. But next week we're going to talk about, oh, by the way, Freed Hardeman admitted their first African-American student in 1965. And H.A. Dixon, and there's a building up here with his name on it, and he was a great preacher, tried to explain to his constituents that the reason they were letting a black student come to school is because they had committed the sin of accepting government money. And that's the only reason they let a black student in. Hey, we're Southerners. And if you're younger than me, you don't remember what it was like. I remember watching cities burn on TV, don't you? And I remember people saying awful things about people just because they were black. And a lot of our people said it. And you can whitewash it all you want, but it's there. But we are who we are. And how we got here is very interesting. But one of the most fascinating deals is the proliferation of our educational fetish as a people. And also how M.B. Hardeman was able, through a series of 5 different lectures given over 15 years in Nashville, solidify the standard centrist message of the churches of Christ and basically set us on our way to who we are today. And almost everything that this church holds sacred would be right in line with absolutely everything M.B. Hardeman said and put in that paper. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying, to me, it's really, really fascinating and interesting. And maybe God puts the right person in the right place at the right time. I believe in that as well. But that's how we basically became a brotherhood. And so we're going to pick it up after World War II next week and talk about the expansion of missions. We came back from World War II wanting to send missionaries right back to the countries we had conquered, which says a lot about our people. And we'll be talking about our new obsession with evangelism again, that second wave that came. Everybody, what's the name of the film strip series? What was that guy's name? Jewel Miller, film strip series. Anybody remember Journey to Eternity? Does anybody besides me remember Journey to Eternity? I was baptized by Journey to Eternity. That was the material I was used. And all these other kinds of things that became a part of who we are and led us into the information age today. I'm sorry I went a little bit long, but I just think this is neat stuff. So let's have a prayer and we'll be dismissed and we'll wind this up next week. Father, we love you.